He spat onto the griddle and muttered, "You call this a legacy dish? What a joke!" And I, the one who had just wiped down the very stove my grandmother once used to cook the first meal for her customers, I just kept my head down and continued scrubbing. It wasn't because I wasn't angry. It was because I was waiting. Have you ever heard someone insult something sacred to you, right to your face, and they have no idea who you are? Have you ever pretended to be silent, just so you could hear the truth? Graham Easton, the 47-year-old CEO of the Easton Smokehouse chain, once the pride of the American South with over 200 locations, had just taken his first bite of sausage after years of not visiting a single branch himself. But this time, he didn't come as the boss. No bodyguards, no assistant, no media. He came alone, quietly, like a stranger wandering in to ask for a job, because for the past 3 months, company revenue had plummeted by 20%, customer reviews had nosedived, and his senior advisors could do nothing but sit in Zoom meetings, blaming it on a competitive market. But Graham knew the problem wasn't the market. It was right there, on the plates being served every day, in the flavor that no longer tasted like his grandmother's cooking. It was in the indifferent eyes of the employees, in the way they tossed food onto tables as if they were throwing away a wad of scrap paper. And that evening, in a hidden corner near the cash register, he overheard something that made his heart stop. The original recipe was sold to Bayfield Grub. They paid $20,000 for it. Who's gonna know, as long as these stupid customers still think it's good? Graham didn't leave. He didn't get angry. He just sat still and began to plan. Tomorrow. The man who had built an entire craft sausage empire from his grandmother's small kitchen would return under the name Frank Doyle, an unemployed janitor looking for a cleaning job in the very restaurant he founded. Because there are some things you can't entrust to anyone else. And there are some fights you have to enter yourself, empty-handed, from the inside. The next morning, just as the clock struck 7:45, the back door of the Eastern Smokehouse in Baton Rouge creaked open. A man stood there, his jacket frayed at the shoulders, his jeans faded, holding a plastic bag containing a resume with a water-stained corner. His boots were caked in grease, as if he'd just walked out of some machine shop in rural Alabama. He introduced himself as Frank Doyle. No fixed address, no car, no bank account. Just one simple request: give me a job, any job. Troy, the branch manager, merely glanced at the resume, yawned, and gave a careless nod. "We're short on someone to clean the kitchen, wash trays, and scrape grease from the deep fryers. Think you can handle it, Graham, or rather..." Frank Doyle nodded. "I've worked in industrial kitchens before. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty." Just a few minutes later, the man who once ran a multi-hundred-million-dollar empire was standing in the back kitchen, wearing a dirty apron, holding a wire brush to scrub the burnt-on grime from the bottom of a pan. No one recognized him. No one paid him any mind. And that very fact gave him his most powerful weapon, invisibility. Within the first 30 minutes, Graham saw things that sent a chill down his spine. The smoker, the heart of the restaurant, was operating improperly. The temperature was abnormally high. The lid was left open, smoke billowing out uncontrolled. Kyle, the one in charge of the grill, was scrolling on his phone while turning the sausages, not even bothering to check the internal temperature as required. And then he saw a sight that made him freeze. A sausage link fell to the floor. Kyle picked it up, blew off the dust, and tossed it back onto the tray as if nothing had happened. Not a single disapproving glance, not a single word of correction. Only Elena, the waitress Graham had seen the day before, paused for a split second. But then she bowed her head and went back to work, her lips pressed into a tight line. Graham stood in his corner, holding a cleaning rag, his chest tightening. This was not the place where his grandmother had once stood, turning each sausage with wooden tongs, smiling as she cooked. The lunch rush began. Graham took a break by the sinks, pretending not to pay attention while he was, in fact, memorizing every detail. Plates came out of the kitchen slowly. The food was cold. The customers' reactions were nothing more than a few sighs and polite, perfunctory nods. An old man sitting at a table near the kitchen, after taking one bite, said to his friend in a weary voice, "It's not like it used to be. I used to drive 3 hours just to eat here." Graham felt as if someone was squeezing his heart. He had spent his entire life protecting that flavor, the one that used to create long lines outside the restaurant on hot weekends, the one that made customers feel like they were coming home. Now, it was being distorted and cheapened. That afternoon, Graham volunteered to clean the spice station, the small pantry where the spice packets were delivered and mixed into the food. He discovered something unusual. Several bags labeled Legacy. Blend, the original formula, had QR codes that didn't match the system he had personally approved. The labels were crudely cut and pasted, the ink fainter than the originals. A few bags had smudged ink, as if printed from a home printer. Graham said nothing. He just quietly took his phone from his pocket, photographed each one, time-stamped the images, and carefully slipped the phone back into his pocket. The first piece of evidence was now in his hands. Evening fell. The restaurant grew quiet. Graham sat alone in a corner behind the dishwashing station, taking a sip of cold water. Elena walked by, paused for a moment, and looked at him with a hesitant expression. Then she moved on. Graham knew he had officially stepped into a system that was rotting from the inside, and if he didn't do something, the name Eastern Smokehouse would soon exist only on a sign, not in the hearts of its customers. Graham was taking a break next to a mop bucket when he heard hushed laughter coming from the employee area behind the vending machine. He moved silently, pressing himself against the brick wall that jutted out between two storerooms. The smell of grease and smoke still hung in the air. The first voice, a woman's, was quiet but clear. "Kyle, we have to keep quiet. If we get caught, we're both finished." Then a man's voice replied, cold yet full of arrogance. "Elena, you worry too much. It's a done deal. Who's gonna know that recipe is already with Bayfield grub?" Graham felt like he was frozen to the spot. Bayfield grub. His biggest rival, the one who had tried to buy out his brand for a pittance, now had his recipe. The whispering continued. "We get $20,000 for each transfer. Elena, That's enough to pay for your niece's college tuition," Elena replied, her voice trembling. "It's not that I don't know that. But what about him? What about Mr. Easton, if he finds out?" Kyle scoffed, a short, sharp laugh. "That old man, he's sleeping soundly on his private jet. He handed over his shares to the board. Who cares about him? Besides, this wasn't my idea." Graham held his breath. His heart began to pound. This came from Troy, and, you remember Victor Lane, right, the COO? He's the one who put out the bait. Victor Lane, his best friend, the man he'd invited to his home for dinner, who had stood beside him on the day they opened their 100th restaurant, the man who was the best man at his daughter's wedding. Graham slowly leaned his back against the wall. His heart didn't ache for the money. It didn't ache for the brand. It ached because the person he trusted most had sold out the most sacred thing his family had ever owned, his grandmother's recipe. Kyle was still rambling on. "I heard Victor is paving his way to a seat on the board at Bayfield Grub. They want to tear down our whole system, absorb all the branches, rebrand everything, and then gut it. They'll only keep the people who are useful." Elena asked quietly. "So, this isn't just about selling a recipe?" Kyle's nod was practically audible in his voice. "No. This is a full-blown hostile takeover of Eastern Smokehouse." A long silence followed. "Kyle, there are hundreds of employees who depend on their paychecks here. Stop being so weak. You think they care if the restaurant closes? They'll just find other jobs. But us, we'll have positions, benefits. Bayfield Grub promised to keep you as a manager if you stay quiet and cooperate." Graham turned and walked away from the area. His hands were trembling slightly, but his gaze was perfectly calm. He knew if he confronted them now, Troy would know, Victor would know, the entire network would be alerted. He needed more proof. He needed to understand the depth of the rot. He needed to bring down the whole network, not just a few pawns. That night, in a cheap motel room by the highway, Graham opened an anonymous laptop and logged into his company's internal security system. He sent an encrypted message to Celine, his head of security, signs of a recipe leak. "Victor Lane is a likely connection. Urgent. Monitor all Axis activity from the Baton Rouge branch. I will continue from the inside." Celine didn't ask why. She replied with a single line. "Understood. Monitoring network will be active as of tonight, after closing the laptop." Graham sat in the darkness. The light from the street lamps filtered through the torn curtains. He thought of his grandmother, of her small hands that would always pat him gently on the shoulder whenever he was tired. He thought of the old wood-fired stove, fueled by oak, its distinctive smoky scent clinging to his clothes for a month. They can steal the spices, they can change the labels, but as long as I'm alive, I will reclaim every last grain of salt in this legacy. 6 a.m. The streets of Baton Rouge were not yet awake. Graham sat in his motel room, pulling on the worn-out work clothes, the soot-stained boots, and the tattered baseball cap he'd kept since his days as a line cook. His face was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night, and his heart was hammering, not from fear, but from resolve. Today, Graham Easton, the man who once signed multi-million-dollar deals, would become a janitor named Frank Doyle. No assistant, no power, no business cards, only calloused hands and a back bent with feigned age. He walked through the back door of the Eastern Smokehouse at 7:42 a.m. Troy, the branch manager, was in his usual spot, feet propped up on a chair, a Starbucks cup in hand, eyes glued to a tablet screen. "What is it?" Troy asked distractedly, without looking up. Graham pulled out the resume. "Frank Doyle. I've worked back of house, washing, storerooms, a lot of places, no permanent address. But I'm strong, and I don't mind hard work." Troy looked at him for a second, snorted, and tossed the resume onto the side of his desk. "We're short-staffed. Need someone to scrape the deep fryers, mop the floors, clean out the ovens." "You up for it?" Graham nodded slowly. "As long as it's a job, I'll do it all. Apron and gloves are in the locker. You're one of us now." Just hours later, he was pushed into the grimiest corner, the grease disposal area behind the fryers. The smell of old food mixed with bleach made his eyes water. But Graham didn't care. Every stain he scrubbed, every burnt spot he scraped away was another layer of filth covering his legacy. And he would wash it all away with his own 2 hands. On the floor, he listened. At the dishwashing station, he watched. In the spice pantry, he memorized. Every curse word, every strange packet of powder. Every time Troy went into his office and locked the door behind him. On his first night, Graham sat resting after his shift in the small employee break room. Kyle walked by, glanced at him, and smirked. "Well, look at you, old man. Made it through a whole day. Usually, guys like you are gone after one shift." Graham smiled and nodded. "I've worked in worse places than this, son." Kyle laughed out loud and walked away. Graham then opened his old phone and typed into his notes app. "Kyle doesn't wash his hands after handling raw meat. The manager says nothing. His attitude toward the customers is pure contempt." The second day, he saw even more. A tray of sausages, more than half of them burnt, was still sent out for service. A customer complained about the burnt smell in their food. Elena offered a sheepish apology, while Kyle muttered behind her back, "If you want good food, don't come here during the lunch rush." Graham took a mental note. No reaction. That night, he sat alone behind the restaurant, next to the grease disposal bin, looking out at the main road. The Eastern Smokehouse sign was still lit, still glowing red as if nothing was wrong. But Graham knew inside the heart of this brand was rotting away, and if he did nothing, it would die in silence. On the third day, he was assigned to clean the freezers. While scrubbing the door, Graham quietly checked the labels on the incoming meat. It was all grade 3 from an unknown source, even though the company invoices still listed it as prime grade. In a deep corner of the storeroom, he discovered a cardboard box containing bags of spices labeled Eastern Legacy Blend. But the color and material were completely different from the real thing. He opened one bag and took a sniff. There was no scent of smoked chili, no aftertaste of oak wood, just a cheap spice mix blended with flour. He closed the bag, took a picture, noted the time, and sealed it back exactly as it was, leaving no trace. That night, in his motel room, Graham looked at his laptop screen and sent a short message to Celine. Fake product confirmed. Need to verify server access data from this branch. The reply came in less than 3 minutes. Trace activated. Need anything else? Graham looked at the images on his screen, a photo of the fake label, a photo of the burnt tray of meat, a photo of the bright sign glowing in the darkness, and replied, I need more time. I'm about to touch the core of the rot. From the 4th day on, Graham was no longer just the old janitor who needed a job. He had become his own eyes, ears, and memory in a silent war between two worlds. The world of those who once believed in genuine value, and the world that was twisting it for profit. Every time he wiped the counter, he exposed a small voice recorder hidden in his inner pocket. Every time he pushed the trash cart past the office, he noted the sound of the door opening, the look in Troy's eyes, and even the times the office computer was running when it shouldn't have been. Every night, he sat in his motel room, connecting the data with Celine, the head of security, sending every recording, every image, every note. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, a conspiracy bigger, deeper than he had first imagined. One late afternoon, as he was cleaning the meat slicer, Elena approached him, whispering, Mr. Doyle, have you ever noticed the sausage tastes strange lately? Graham looked up. Why do you ask? Elena looked around, lowering her voice. I've worked here for 5 years. Before, every morning we'd line up, waiting for the fresh block of smoked meat. Now, the meat has been frozen for weeks, and the spices. Sometimes they smell fragrant. Sometimes they smell like air freshener. She showed him that day's inventory sheet. Look at this. Every week we receive 120 bags of legacy blend spice, but only 40 have the correct system code. The rest have fake labels. Graham pretended to frown as if he didn't understand, but inside, a storm was raging. Have you told Troy? Elena gave a bitter laugh. I did. The next day, my shift was changed. I also reported it to the quality control department. Less than 3 days later, my hours were cut, and I was removed from the list for the quarterly bonus. Graham nodded slowly. He knew. He had lived long enough to understand that when good people are forced into silence, it means the entire system is rotten. That night, he stayed after his shift, using the excuse of cleaning the greasy equipment. No one noticed, and while the restaurant lights were dimmed, he quietly returned to the spice pantry, opened each box, pulled out each bag to photograph the QR code, and sealed it back exactly as it was. Some of the bags could not be traced in the internal system. Others had labels printed from a small print shop in a town in Texas, a place that had never had a contract with Eastern Smokehouse. He sent all the data to Celine. Just a few minutes later, she messaged back, the bags are counterfeit, sourced from a third-party partner approved by Troy. I'm investigating the payment accounts now. Graham typed another line. The evidence is mounting, but I need them to get more confident to expose themselves more clearly. Prepare for the next phase. The next day, he came back for the afternoon shift. Troy walked past, giving him a look that was half smile, half warning. "Mr. Doyle, I hear you've been asking a lot of questions. I hired a floor sweeper, not an FBI agent." Graham bowed his head and nodded. "I just don't want to clean up something I'm not supposed to." Troy laughed, clapping him on the shoulder, a bit too hard to be friendly. "It's good to know your place." Graham swallowed his anger. This wasn't the first time he'd been insulted, but it would be the last. That night, in his motel room, Graham looked at an old photo sitting on his laptop, a picture of his grandmother tying string around a sausage link with her trembling hands. He whispered to himself, "Grandma, they're destroying everything you taught me, but I won't let them laugh on the grave of decency." Starting tomorrow, Graham wouldn't just be collecting evidence. He would be setting a trap using the very recipe that was once a legacy and would now become the bait. Graham had grown accustomed to the indifference, to the empty eyes of the servers who acted as if they were playing a game they were forced to lose, to the bored clatter of the kitchen printer spitting out orders. No one cared if the food was actually good or not. But amidst all this apathy, there was one person who was not like the rest, Elena. She didn't know she was being watched, but Graham had been keeping an eye on her for days. He saw how she handled difficult customers, never snappy, just gentle, asking again to make sure they were satisfied. He saw her walk past the order station instead of ignoring it like everyone else. She would straighten a fallen napkin dispenser, quickly wipe up a spill someone else had just made. She didn't say much, but her eyes did, and they hadn't lost their fire. One night, after closing, Graham was sitting on his usual spot by the grease bin, his escape from the hollow conversations. The back door opened. Eleanor walked over, holding 2 paper cups of tea. She handed one to him without a word. Graham took it, surprised. "How did you know I sit here?" Eleanor sat down, not looking at him. "I used to hide out here too, when I was new, back when I still believed I could change something." Graham was silent. The tea was hot cheap, but with a strong cinnamon flavor, and the warmth spread through his wrinkled hands. "I miss the old smell of the smoke," Elena whispered. "Before, when the kitchen used real wood, the air here was different. Customers could smell it before they even walked in. Now, the food might fill you up, but no one feels warm anymore." Graham turned to look at her. She wasn't crying, but her voice was slightly broken. "I reported it. I told my superiors about the cheap meat, the fake spices. They just stayed silent. The next day, my shift was changed. My co-workers started whispering behind my back. That's when I understood. If I wanted to keep my job, it was best to shut up." Graham nodded slowly. "And you still stayed." Elena smiled a smile mixed with self-mockery and pride. "Because I know if I leave, there will be no one left doing the right thing, not even a little." That night, Graham wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. Every word Elena had said was now etched in his mind. Elena didn't know who he was. She didn't know the man sitting next to her was the founder of this restaurant chain, the person who had personally stacked the smoker with his grandmother during the cold winter of 1996. And precisely because she didn't know, her words were all the more real, all the more precious. 2 days later, Graham saw her again, this time at the inventory board. She was frowning, a pen in her hand, running it over lines that didn't match up. "The reported spice usage doesn't match the delivery numbers," she muttered. "This is the 3rd week in a row." Graham pretended to walk by, set down a tray of water, and asked quietly, "What are you going to do with those numbers?" Elena didn't look up. "Nothing. If I report it, I'll be seen as a troublemaker. But if someone asks, I'll be ready to tell them everything, from beginning to end." Graham narrowed his eyes. If someone asks? He understood. She no longer trusted the system, but she was still waiting for someone who could listen to her, truly listen. That night, Graham marked a single line in his notebook, with a red star next to it, "Elena not corrupted." A genuine element, could be the first link in a cultural recovery. On his way back to the motel, Graham stopped his bicycle on a deserted bridge, looking at the water flowing below. For the first time in days, he didn't feel alone. There was still someone who knew how to tie a sausage link by hand, who knew how to wipe a table properly, even when no one was watching, and who knew the pain of seeing true value betrayed. There was still a fire. That afternoon, the restaurant was unusually busy. A tour bus had made an unexpected stop, bringing in over 20 hungry passengers right at shift change. Graham was hastily cleaning the fryers when he heard the crash of dishes, the frantic whirring of the receipt printer, and the chorus of orders echoing from the kitchen line. Kyle was snapping at everyone, throwing pans, his shirt soaked with sweat. Troy appeared for about 5 minutes, managed to say 2 sentences, "Don't burn the food," and then retreated to his office and closed the door. In the midst of the chaos, Elena remained strangely calm. She typed on the register with both hands, still smiling as she greeted customers, her left hand grabbing iced tea, her right hand giving back change. Graham, from his hidden corner, watched her as he mopped the floor. His eyes never left her, not just because of her composure, but because something about Eleanor was different today. After the rush subsided, Graham saw her standing alone in front of the inventory board, a clipboard in her hand. He moved closer, pretending to wipe down a nearby cabinet. Eleanor turned, her voice low. "Frank, do you know that each branch is sent a specific number of spice bags?" Graham nodded. "So I've heard." She held out the clipboard, her finger pointing to a highlighted line. "For 3 weeks, the system has reported we are using the Heritage Signature blend. But based on the flavor, I swear, at least half of it isn't the real thing." Graham narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure?" Eleanor nodded firmly. "I've worked here long enough to tell the difference between real smoked chili and MSG mixed with food coloring. And what's more, the bags aren't sealed properly. Some of them even have misprinted labels." Graham fell silent, bending down to pick up his cleaning cloth, hiding the shock in his eyes. "Have you told Troy?" he asked. "As a test." Elena gave a bitter laugh and shook her head. "Do I even need to ask? He's the one who orders the supplies. 3 weeks ago, I sent him a text asking about a new batch of spices. The next morning, my morning shift was cut, and on the schedule, someone had crossed my name out with a red pen." Graham clenched his fist behind his back. The evidence was clear. Troy didn't just know. He was the one directly manipulating the data. The end-of-shift announcement rang out. Elena closed her clipboard and turned to leave. Graham wanted to call her back to tell her who he was, to thank her for preserving her humanity in a soulless junkyard. But he couldn't. Not now. That night, Graham snuck into the prep room under the pretense of cleaning the meat slicer. He found the questionable spice bags, scanned each QR code, and used a software to trace them. Within 15 minutes, he confirmed his suspicions. These bags did not belong to the Eastern system. The QR codes led to an intermediary company, which Victor Lane had signed a contract with just 2 months ago. The import was approved by Troy as a temporary trial. Graham sent all the photos, the QR codes, the timestamps, the location to Celine, with a message attached. "Get ready. I'm going to need a special recipe and a perfect trap." Celine replied with a single emoji late that night. Graham sat alone on a bench behind the store, watching the flickering lights of the sign. Inside, food was still being served, but it had lost its soul. And he knew there was only one way to make the traitors reveal themselves. Let them take the bait themselves. The next morning, Graham arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, but he was already in the kitchen, adjusting the tool trays, his mind calculating every next step. With the evidence he had, he could expose the whole affair. But if he did, Victor Lane would have time to bleach his tracks. No, Graham didn't want to unmask a few low-level employees. He wanted to bring down the entire rotten system. To do that, he needed the perfect lure. That afternoon, on an encrypted call from a private phone, Celine spoke concisely. "The fake recipe is ready. It has enough of the right aroma so no one will suspect. But we've changed 2 ingredients, one sweet, one spicy, that can be precisely traced. It's named Heritage Experimental Blend 91X in the internal R&D folder. Only senior-level staff can access it." Graham nodded and hung up. He then quietly logged into his CEO account from a back-office computer, pretending to check inventory, but intentionally leaving the recipe screen open for a few minutes. Right on cue, Kyle walked by and glanced at the screen. "Hey Frank, why is this computer open to a company folder?" Graham feigned confusion and quickly closed it. I was just told to follow the cleaning instructions. I must have clicked something by mistake." Kyle narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. Perfect. The fish had smelled the bait. The next afternoon, Graham was working the night shift. By chance, he saw Kyle walk into the storeroom with a company tablet, something only Troy or an upper-level manager should have been able to use to access R&D data. Elena walked by and quietly asked Frank, "Do you find that strange? Since when does a line cook get to review research documents?" Graham just smiled. "I think we might be getting a new dish soon." Just as he predicted, only 2 days later, Graham overheard a conversation outside the delivery area. Bayfield Grub is about to launch a premium sausage line next weekend. They're calling it Gold Heritage. The flavor is almost identical to Easton's old stuff. The other person continued, The ingredients are just different enough to avoid a lawsuit. But I heard the original recipe was just leaked. Graham almost wanted to laugh. They had no idea the thing they had just stolen was the bait, a fake recipe created for the sole purpose of trapping a traitor. That night, in his motel room, Graham and Celine had an urgent meeting on their private channel. Trace it for me who downloaded file 91X. From which device, and at what time? Celine replied in exactly 12 minutes. Got it. The device was an internal tablet logged in under Troy's account. The data was sent through a hidden email to an address linked to an IP that has previously appeared at Bayfield Grub. Graham clenched his fist. That was enough. It wasn't just Troy. This was a trail leading directly to Victor Lane. The next morning, Graham came to work as usual. Troy greeted him with a strange tone, as if he was testing something. Heard you're doing a good job. Frank. Interested in staying on for a while. Graham smiled and nodded slightly. As long as this restaurant needs someone to clean the kitchen, I'll be here. Troy laughed. But Graham saw it in his eyes, suspicion. They must have sensed that something was off, and that was the sign that the trap was about to close. Late that afternoon, the Baton Rouge sky turned unusually gloomy. The wind rustled through the metal awnings behind the restaurant, the smell of cooked food clinging to the air, to the brick walls, to his very skin. Graham was taking the trash out back when he saw Kyle, the foul-mouthed cook everyone called the arrogant one, behind his back, leaning against a wall near the delivery bay, holding a phone, a smirk on his face as he talked. Graham quietly changed direction, hiding behind 2 grease bins and a stack of uncompressed cardboard boxes. In his hand, the recorder was ready. Kyle's voice rang out, without a hint of caution. Yeah, he totally bought it. That recipe. He left it wide open on the kitchen computer, like he was telling us to take it. Graham held his breath, his heart pounding like a war drum. Troy said Victor already sent it to Bayfield Grub's R&D team. They're going crazy over the new flavor. They're about to launch it nationwide with a new name, Gold Heritage. They've already got the print samples, posters, even a commercial filmed. A pause. Then Kyle laughed even louder. He has no idea. Who would ever guess some clueless janitor is the CEO, Larry? Frank, whatever his name is. As long as he knows how to hold a mop, he's good enough. Graham closed his eyes for a brief moment, not out of pain, but out of relief. That sentence was the final nail in the coffin of their entire conspiracy. They already told us. Kyle continued, his voice lower, but still dripping with smug satisfaction. After the plan succeeds, we get transferred to a new branch, higher salary, shares in the project. Victor gets a seat on the board. Troy gets to be the regional coordinator. And me, I'm going to be the head chef for the legacy product line. Can you believe it? Graham opened his eyes, gently squeezing his wrist. In the greying afternoon light, he saw it clearly. They hadn't just betrayed him. They were selling off every fiber of value that he and his grandmother had spent their lives building. Kyle shoved the phone in his pocket, yawned, and went back inside. Graham stood still in the corner, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He checked the recording device. The file was saved, time-stamped. Kyle's voice, captured perfectly. And it contained everything he needed to end this game. That night, in his motel room, Graham called Celine. The bait has been taken. They didn't just use the fake recipe, they're even calling it Gold Heritage and preparing to market it nationwide. I've heard the recording, Celine replied. Kyle's voice is a perfect match for his voice ID in our system. We have legal evidence, IP traces, the invoices for the fake spices, and an indirect confession. They've buried themselves. Graham let out a long breath. It had been a long time since his lungs had felt so light. Tomorrow, I'm not going in to mop the floors. Everything is ready, Celine said. The right time, the right people, and the right moment. Graham hung up. He sat in silence, staring at the old ceiling. His mind wasn't in the present. It was traveling back in time to a winter morning long ago, a small kitchen, the smell of oak smoke, and the sound of his grandmother's affectionate scolding when he got the salt and pepper ratio wrong. He smiled, his eyes welling up slightly. Tomorrow, Grandma, I'm going to clean everything up, not with a mop, but with the truth. 10:47 a.m., a Thursday. The Eastern Smokehouse branch in Baton Rouge was strangely quiet. The sky was grey. A cold wind blew through the cracks in the glass doors. Unlike other days, there was no sound of laughter from the kitchen counter, no quiet country music playing in the background. Just a silence. That was heavy, oppressive, as if everyone knew a storm was coming. Graham was in the back kitchen, wiping down the lid of the smoker, but this time he was no longer Frank Doyle. He wore a crisp grey shirt under his apron. His face was clean-shaven. His eyes were no longer downcast. His back was no longer stooped. Today, he wasn't pretending anymore. The front door swung open. A woman in a grey suit walked in. She walked with a decisive gait, her eyes as sharp as a blade. Celine Ward, head of internal security for the Eastern Group, walked straight to the counter, ordered 2 heritage sausage platters to go, and then sat at a corner table like a stranger. 5 minutes later, another man walked in. A long cashmere coat, slicked back hair, polished Italian leather shoes. Victor Lane, COO of Eastern Smokehouse. The man who was once Graham's best friend. Now, the traitor at the head of a conspiracy to destroy the company. Victor gave the server a polite smile. I have an appointment with the manager. Let me see Troy. Eleanor, who was at the counter, looked surprised but nodded, quickly walking toward the office. Graham, from inside the kitchen, stood up straight. It was time. He removed his apron. He placed it gently on the cutting board and adjusted his sleeves. Then he walked out the same familiar man, but this time with a presence that froze the entire room. Eleanor, just turning from the office, stopped dead in her tracks. Graham stepped into the main dining area, the light illuminating his true face. Victor. His voice rang out, not loud, but enough to make every head turn. Victor looked up, frowning slightly, and then the color drained from his face. Graham. The entire restaurant fell silent. A staff member dropped a tray of water, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the space. Victor stammered, I didn't expect to see you here." Graham gave a slight nod. "Clearly. Otherwise, I doubt you would have come." He took one step at a time. Each step carried the weight of decades of building an empire and of every wound inflicted by betrayal. Troy, just emerging from his office, froze. Kyle peeked his head out from the kitchen, then quickly pulled back, but it was too late. Graham turned to face the entire restaurant. "My name is Graham Easton. I founded this restaurant chain from a small kitchen behind my grandmother's house, and for the past 2 weeks, I have been standing right here, mopping floors, scraping grease, and recording every single thing in silence." Everyone was stunned. I heard the conversations behind closed doors. I saw the fake spice packets with their fraudulent labels. I could smell the rot, not just from the ingredients, but from within the very people who were once trusted. He walked to the counter and took a folder from Celine's hand. He placed it on the central table, turning over each page like evidence in a trial. "This is the system access log proving Troy logged in and downloaded an internal recipe. These are photos of the spice packets imported from a shell company that Victor signed a contract with under the guise of a temporary trial. And this," he held up his phone and pressed play. Kyle's voice filled the room. "Some clueless janitor. He has no idea. Bayfield Grub is going to launch that recipe nationwide." A dead silence fell over the restaurant. Troy backed away. Kyle's face was ashen. Victor turned to Celine. "No, Celine, this is a misunderstanding. We were just... I was never directly..." Graham cut him off. "How much did you sell our family recipe for?" Victor. A seat on the board. A promise from a competitor. "How many more people would you have sold out if I hadn't shown up at the right time?" He turned to Elena, his eyes softening. "You were the only one here who still had that fire. I saw how you worked, how you fought your silent battle, how you refused to become like the rest." Her eyes widened as she looked at him, nearly dropping the tray in her hands. Graham gave her a slight nod. "You are the reason I believe we can build this back from the ground up." He turned back to the center of the room. "As of this moment, this branch is temporarily closed for a full audit. Troy, you're fired. Kyle, you will be prosecuted. Victor, I expect you'll be preparing to meet the board of directors with your lawyer." No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Graham walked straight to the main door, the wind blowing in and catching his shirt. As he passed the Eastern Smokehouse sign, he looked up. "They thought I would never stoop to mopping floors, but it's because I did that I saw everything they tried to hide." 3 days later, in the main boardroom of the Eastern Group in New Orleans, Graham didn't walk in as the founder. He walked in as a man who had lived inside the very decay his company was fostering. And he didn't come to apologize. He came to clean house. Behind him was Celine, holding a thick folder containing the internal system access data for Troy and Victor. Photos of the fake spice packets and the QR codes leading to the intermediary company in Houston. The audio recording of Kyle's voice detailing the agreement with Bayfield Grub, the name of the new product, Gold heritage, which matched an old proposal from Victor himself a year prior. On the large screen behind them was a side-by-side comparison of the original heritage recipe and the fake one Bayfield Grub was about to launch. The room was silent. No one clapped. No one sighed. Because the truth, when laid bare, needs no special effects. It only needs to be heard. Graham stood tall, his hands steady, his voice low and firm. We are not here to handle a case of theft. We are here to look directly into the hole that this very system has created. Victor Lane will be prosecuted for unauthorized access to internal systems and the sale of intellectual property. Troy Evans will be subject to a federal investigation on charges of conspiracy. Kyle Monroe and several other staff members at the Baton Rouge branch will be permanently barred from working in any Eastern-affiliated entity. Graham looked around the room, then continued, "But punishment won't save the soul of a business. To save it, we have to change it from the roots up." And with that, he announced 4 major changes. A complete, system-wide internal audit. Starting with the supply chain, every branch must verify its inventory monthly, with on-site witness signatures. The launch of the Heritage Hotline, an anonymous feedback channel for frontline employees to report misconduct directly to the corporate board without interference. A profit-sharing program. Starting next month, anyone who has worked at a branch for 18 months with a review score above 80% will receive a percentage of the quarterly profits. The relaunch of the Heritage product line, but this time under a new name, Heritage Flame. It wasn't just a flavor, it was a belief rekindled by a real flame, real people and real values. Graham didn't let the marketing department take the lead. He went back to the research lab, testing every batch of spices with the R&D team. He interviewed every smoker operator, checking each sausage link by hand, just as he did when he was a line cook. Once, someone asked him, "Why do you still need to do all this? You're the CEO." Graham just smiled. "It's because I'm the CEO that I can't afford to forget the first flavor my grandmother cooked with her bare hands, in a kitchen that didn't even have a thermometer." A week later, he returned to the Baton Rouge branch this time, without a disguise. The kitchen was cleaner, brighter. Eleanor was at the counter, teaching 2 new employees how to spot an overcooked sausage. Graham watched from a distance, saying nothing. When she saw him, her expression wasn't one of shock, but of quiet understanding, as if the 2 of them had shared a silent bond their whole lives. After work, he called her over. "Have you ever thought about becoming a regional trainer?" Eleanor paused. "Are you serious?" Graham nodded. "I'm not offering you a position. I'm offering you a path. And I believe it starts with you." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She just nodded slowly, her eyes shining. And exactly 1 week later, an internal company memo was sent out. Eleanor Martinez, assistant head of the regional training program, appointment effective immediately. On a Friday night, during a tasting for the new Heritage Flame samples, an elderly customer raised her hand. This tastes like something I had in Mississippi back in 1989. It's not just delicious. It feels like I'm in the right place." Graham looked at the woman and nodded. "We call that getting it right all over again. And this time, we're not going to lose it. The small kitchen in rural Mississippi was as quiet as the day he had left it. Graham stood before the old wooden door. The paint was peeling, the handle cold to the touch. He pushed it gently. The door opened with a creak, not the sound of age, but the sound of memory returning. Here, he had stood beside his grandmother every Saturday morning, listening to the crackle of burning charcoal, the smell of smoke mingling with pepper, chili, and something indescribable, the smell of waiting, the smell of patience. On the stove, the old wooden rack still held a collection of old cooking tools. A faded, crooked photo hung on the wall, his grandmother's thin hands tying red string around each sausage link. Her face wasn't in the frame, only those hands. But he knew it wasn't the image, but the meaning behind it that he had always protected. Graham walked to a familiar corner cabinet. He knelt down and opened a small wooden box. Inside, there was no gold or silver, no copyrighted recipe, just a stack of old, faded, ink-stained papers. His grandmother's handwritten notes, each one a simple line, but full of meaning. Don't rush the smoke. Smoke has to be slow to be fragrant. One bite and they should want to come back. Don't use spices to hide a mistake. Use your heart to fix it. And finally, the most tattered piece of paper, a line in red ink, almost completely faded. You can't mass-produce pride. He sat there, in the quiet space, with only the ticking of an old clock. Then he read that line again, this time, with his whole heart. Pride is something that can't be created on an assembly line, with advertising, or with tricks. It comes from how we do something when no one is watching. From how we keep a promise even when we're the only one who knows that promise ever existed. No one could take that flavor from him. No one could steal his legacy as long as he held on to the spirit that created it. On his way out of the house, Graham paused on the porch. He put the box back in the cabinet, carefully folded the photograph, and turned off the light. When he closed the door, there was no echo, only peace. The following week, he would return to the office, not to sign contracts or approve budgets, but to build a new training program called the Slow Flame Initiative, an initiative that emphasized quality, integrity, and how every employee must understand why they do what they do. Because Eastern Smokehouse was no longer just a restaurant chain, it was a promise. It was a flame, passed from his grandmother's hand to his hand, to Eleanor's hand, and to all those who were about to step into the kitchen for the first time. And then, during a tasting for a new dish at a distant branch, a young boy stood up and asked him, "Mr. Graham, what's so special about this sausage that people call it Heritage Flame?" Graham looked at the boy and smiled softly. "It's special because someone was willing to risk his reputation, his power, all to protect that little hint of spice at the end of the first bite." The boy blinked. "That sounds complicated." Graham leaned down and winked. "You'll understand when you're older, because some things don't need to be explained, they just need to be felt. And if you can feel it, then you're eating it right." A legacy isn't in a recipe. It isn't in the name printed on a sign. It's in every action taken when no one is watching. Every choice made between what is right and what is easy, and in how we stand up when the thing that matters most is under threat. Graham Easton didn't just save a flavor, he saved a standard. And reminded all of us that the truest flame always begins from within.